Hi, my name is Kristen and this is Kristen Craves Books. It's actually been a minute since I've done a collab with Beccie, but here we are. This one is just her and I this time, and we are talking about our favorite books that have the found family trope. I'm very curious to see what books Beccie recommends because I have a feeling our lists are going to be pretty different, and this is one of my favorite tropes ever. I'll leave a link to her video down below. That's Beccie at Bex Reads. If you're not familiar with the found family trope, to me it's just we're following characters who are spending time with their chosen family, so their friends that become family versus their blood family. So it's the family you choose, not the family you are born into. And there's just something about that whole dynamic that tends to hit for me. I am a character-driven reader, and I just think reading about such a strong friend group that becomes a family and will sacrifice things for each other, and they have great banter and love for each other, and maybe some of the relationships within that friend group become romantic, but a lot of them stay platonic. I just think it's such a great setup. For some reason, it's this setup, this kind of character dynamic that tends to stick with me, and a lot of my favorite books feature the found family trope, so I'm excited to share 10 or 11 of them with you today. I didn't quite count, but these are some of my favorite books of all time. A few that I don't get the chance to talk about on my channel as much as I would want to, so it's exciting to have that opportunity to do that, and again, I cannot wait to see what Beccie comes up with. So first we have Irregular by Jordan Fueco. Speaking of not having a chance to talk about my favorite books as much as I would like to, this is my favorite YA series. It is a duology, so this one is Irregular and the second one is Redemptor. The first book is my favorite, but I do like it as a whole. Probably in my top 5 books of all time. I need to reread it, but I just love it. It has stayed with me. It's been years since I read it, and it feels like yesterday. And I follow Jordan Fueco on social media, and she just announced that she's announcing another book, and I think it's Beauty and the Beast inspired, but with Gaston. So I'm into that. I think she said in February, so keep a lookout for that one. We're following Teresa, who is being raised in isolation. Her mom is absent, and she is being trained to kill the prince. She knows that this is her fate in life, and then we get to the point where she's old enough to go to the kingdom and become a part of the prince's court. And the setup of this world is really interesting. The political maneuvering is probably some of my favorite. And the way that the prince and his court are connected to each other is through something called the ray. So they become very, very close, where they are mentally connected and in some cases can hear one another's thoughts and feel their emotions. So as Teresa becomes part of this court, obviously she starts to care for the crown prince and the other members. And it's so interesting to see her battle with her devotion to her mother, who hasn't been present in her life, but she's been raised with this idea. So it's your whole entire childhood. It's where you're told your fate was your entire life. And then actually being thrown into that situation and realizing you care for these people you're supposed to kill. It's brilliantly done. There's a lot of really strong platonic relationships in this, which I really, really appreciated. I love to see all of the dynamics between the other members of court, not just the relationships with Teresa, but their relationships with each other, their relationships with the crown prince. The crown prince is so endearing in this. I just thought that this was beautiful, and it's a book I need to talk about more. It's one I need to reread. I love it so much. I even got the UK edition of this because I am just in love with it, and I pre-ordered it and everything because I was sent an e-arc of this at the time. So I have a signed copy here. It says, "Own Your Story, Jordan Fueco." I love this so much, and I can't wait to see what she comes out with next, and hopefully it has that found family trope as well, because I think she does that so well. You're probably getting so sick of me talking about this book and this series in general, one of my favorite series of all time, but you really can't make a video about the found family trope without talking about this series, so I have to. And that is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Beccie Chambers. This is the first book, but every single book in this series has the found family trope. They each follow different characters, but within them, it's all found family. That is what Beccie Chambers does best. She also has that in all of the novellas that she's written. In A Song for the Wild Built, you get this found family relationship between a monk and a robot, which is so endearing. In To Be Taught If Fortunate, you also get a found family between these characters who are stuck on a spaceship and think the end of the world is upon them. So she's just really brilliant at that, and I think that is just what she likes to write, and that's what I eat up. And she's a character-driven author, and this one is a space opera where we were following a bunch of characters on the same spaceship, how they run it. We follow like the chef. Our main character is a human who's coming on board and is kind of keeping a secret. We follow all of these different species, and we see how they probably shouldn't get along, but they do. And their relationships, both romantic and platonic, and how much they deeply, deeply care about each other and will sacrifice themselves for one another. And then as you move through the rest of the series, you have different settings. They're not all on spaceships. You have different characters, but at the base, it's found family. And it's just my favorite thing ever. I just love it so, so much. So if you're gonna read one found family book, this is like peak for me. Then we have another favorite. I talked about this in my best books of 2023, but it is just found family, and I had to include it, and that is Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. This is actually following a brother and a sister, so blood family, but they are separated when they are children, and they are on opposite sides of a rebellion. And we get both of their POVs, so we see the families that they create separately and apart from one another. So we see Maya, and she has a romance that is building, but she also has some friendships that she is forming. And then we see Gear, who is a bit more stoic than Maya is and not as open to friendships, but these friendships are kind of forced upon him, and he realizes how strongly connected he is to these people in his life. So it's brilliant. You get all these different perspectives of found family, and I do think that Django Wexler does a good job of finding the balance between character driven and plot driven. So I think a lot of found family trope type books are character driven, but if you're a plot driven reader and are looking for that trope, I think that this one is a good one to turn to. Moving on to a few that I don't own. The first one I feel like is obvious if you've read it, but I have to include it, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. And this is more contemporary than the other ones that I've mentioned, though obviously it follows witches, so there is that bit of fantasy to it. It is set in our world, but there are witches, but humans don't know that they exist, and two witches cannot be close to one another for far too long because their magic becomes too powerful, and then they will be discovered by humans. So we are following one witch in particular who is lonely. Obviously, she can't be around other witches, and she starts making YouTube videos like this one talking about magic, and she just assumes that nobody's gonna think that is real. But somebody discovers her, realizes that she's the real deal, and asks her to come to this manor where they are keeping these younger witches together and teach them about magic. And this is very strange because, as I said, witches cannot be together, but she goes there and she forms this found family with the young witches that are there, as well as their caretakers. And of course there's a romance in there with one of the caretakers who's a bit more broody, and it's just endearing and sweet. It will make you cry in a positive, happy way, because it did for me at least. We are getting another book from this author. I'm hoping it has some found family aspects as well, because she's really great at capturing endearing moments between characters who are slowly realizing how much they mean to each other. And it just warms my heart to even think about it. Then we have a book that's not even out yet. I read an e-arc of it. It comes out at the end of February, and this is Laur of the Wilds by Annalise Brana. This is a fantasy romance, but there's some really great found family and side characters in this as well. In the beginning, our main character Laur is with other humans in this small village where the humans are kind of kept prisoner, and she has great found family happening there. Her parents have died. She currently lives with her aunt and uncle. She has a best friend, and her aunt and uncle have started this orphanage, so she is taking care of all of these children, and they have formed a really strong found family bond. But then through a series of circumstances, she is removed from this town, brought to the Fae world, where she has to go through an enchanted library. And then during the second half, it kind of takes a turn. We meet some characters who are helping her, who also form this found family bond with her. And there's one character in particular who I won't even talk about that I absolutely adored. And they have an instant friendship that I ate up and thought was so, so sweet. So I haven't even talked about this book on my channel yet because I just read it. It will be in my January wrap-up vlog style, so you'll hear more about it then. I'll talk about it in my February releases, but it deserves so much hype. I love the cover, obviously. I love the romances in here are interesting. I really love the found family, obviously. I think the world's interesting. The end blew my mind. I cannot wait for book 2. But yeah, definitely a book you need to have on your radar. I then included Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher because I think that this is a different take on the found family trope. We're following a main character who is on a mission to save her sister. So we have that blood connection there. Her sister is getting married and it's a situation where she's going to be in a lot of danger. So our main character is on a journey to save her. And she is told that she has to do all these things along the way. So it's a bit of a quest story, and I don't like quest stories, but T. Kingfisher is always my exception. So on her journey, she encounters a variety of creatures that become her found family. So we have a grave witch, a fairy godmother, a knight, a demon chicken. So there's a lot of interesting characters that make up this friendship group that are on this quest together, and it's hilarious because they're obviously all so different. They have some great banter. There's a romance that is very slow burn in that group as well, and I ate it up. It's such a different take on the found family trope because nobody's really choosing to be part of this mission, but as they go on they start to form really strong bonds, and I just thought it was fantastic. I also think that cozy fantasy tends to have this found family trope in it, so you can make an argument obviously for Legends and Lattes. I think Emily Wilde as well has some found family elements in it, even though at the forefront it is a romance. Can't Spell Treason Without Tea definitely has that because it's following these characters who move to small villages most of the time and meet all the townspeople and form connections with them, so that setup really leads to the found family trope. But one of my favorites is A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic, and that is by J. Penner. And this is following a woman who has lost her parents, and she is baking to survive. So she goes to these markets every week and sells her baked goods, but she's human in a world where there are orcs and elves, and she's very much looked down upon. Her next door neighbors are these 2 male orcs who are married in a couple who kind of take her under their wing because they lived beside this family throughout her entire childhood, so they feel a connection to her. And she's reluctant. She's put up walls, but they are going to force those walls down, and they really look at her almost like a daughter. And then they enter her into this baking competition. She ends up going, and we see her form friendships with the other contestants. So not only does she have that found family back at home with her neighbors, she starts forming them with the contestants on the baking show, and we see all the competitions and everything. It is so fun. I ate this up, pun intended, and I think that is why I like baking shows as much as I do, things like Great British Bake Off, because the connections between the bakers is just so delightful. So we definitely get that into this one, and I thought it was really, really sweet. I think there's an argument to be made that Murderbot is found family. A very, very slow burn one, but it definitely happens. So Murderbot is a robot, obviously, who becomes sentient and just wants to stay at home and watch like telenovelas all day long, but is forced into these situations where it has to protect humans very reluctantly. And over the course of the series, we see that it really deeply cares about these humans as much as it doesn't want to admit that it does. And there are certain relationships that develop throughout the series that I am just in love with, and I think is the sweetest thing ever. And to see Murderbot still fight against it a little bit is just so much fun. It just brings me so much joy. I just love that series as much as everybody else does. I just think it's great. All the books on my list so far have been science fiction and fantasy, so I have 3 that are not. The first one is Still Life by Sarah Widman. This is historical fiction. It was the best book that I read in 2022, and that all comes down to the found family trope that is in this. That is pretty much what this book is about. It even says on the inside that it's a captivating, big-hearted, richly tapestried story about people brought together by love, war, art, flood, and the ghost of E.M. Forster. So it is following a character named Ulysses, and it opens up in Tuscany in 1944, and he ends up having an encounter with this older woman, and that is all they have. They have this one encounter, and then we follow them as the years go on and see them meet once again, and how that bond and that connection that they had is still very much present and how they've thought about each other throughout all the years. But then we follow Ulysses in particular and the found family that he has with a bunch of interesting characters in this pub back home in London. So we see him have a fling, or he's got like unrequited love with this one particular woman, and then he ends up in a situation where he has to take care of her daughter. and then the bartender there, some of the other patrons there as well. And we follow him as he ends up moving back to Tuscany, what happens there, making new connections in Tuscany as well, but still having these pulls to London. And it's just fantastic. It's very much character driven. I think it takes place over 60 years or something, and I thought it was beautiful. The characters are amazing. It really is just a story about the power of connection and humanity, and I think that Sarah Winman is just a genius. And then we have the Ensemble. I would just say that this is literary fiction, contemporary. It's following obviously an ensemble, so it is I think they're a quartet. I have this book from Page Habit with all the notes from the author. Yeah, it's Gianna, Britt, Daniel, and Henry. Again, it's another story that's told over many years, I think a few decades. So we see them as they form this quartet, as they form their friendship, and as that becomes more complicated, as they grow up, as different feelings happen, and they break up, they get back together, they have platonic friendships within this group as well. So we see how that develops over the years, but it's really centered around music, and I thought it was really well done and beautiful. It's actually the book that made me realize how much I like books that feature music, but at the end of the day, it is about the found family aspect of how these four very different characters have grown up and how they change, but they share this connection and this love of music. So fantastic, another one I need to reread at some point. Last but not least, these have all been like more happy books. I mean, Ensemble, that relationship, that found family can be messy, but not to the point that it is in this book, but I do think it still counts, and that is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I think a lot of dark academia has found family, but not in the wholesome way that you would think of when you first think of that trope. But I want to throw it in there. This is just following a bunch of students who are at this college and they're studying Shakespeare and they're putting on a Shakespeare play, and it opens with our main character getting released from prison and having a conversation with the cop who put him behind bars, and the cop just wants to know what really happened. And we go back in time and we see how one of the students there is murdered, and the strange and unhealthy bonds that all of these characters have to one another and how they connect through Shakespeare. So it's different. I think it's being made into a TV show or a movie, so now's a good time to check it out. This is not your typical found family. Go into it expecting something a bit more sinister and pretentious, not wholesome at all. So there we have it. Those are the books that I love that feature found family. I know I'm probably missing a ton. I would love to hear what you would put on your list. What is your favorite? And if you have any recommendations for me, I could definitely do a part 2 of this in the future because it is my favorite trope. Thanks again to Beccie for asking me to collab. I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye for now.